myself, like, can we pass like some sort of a measure that's like, you know what, if you want to take down after December 31st or January 6th, whatever, if you want to take down your candy canes and your Santa's claws, that's fine. But like, can we at least just like leave up the white twinkle lights like through February or something? Because I don't know, everything just feels more magical during that pretty dismal time of year. If we could just leave some twinkle lights up, that's all I'm asking for.
100%. And we have kind of a story here in Rochester. We have this thing called the Liberty Pole that they have lighted with white twinkle lights. So it's this gigantic kind of cone shaped thing in the city, and they keep it up all year, even in the summer, because people asked for it because it's
You
just so
should.
beautiful.
Why not? Like, I know somebody's going to be like, "Ah, electric bills," but I'm like, you know what? But it's just for, it's good for the soul. Just leave the freaking twinkle lights up, guys. Come on.
I love it. Well, you're here on a word with Kelly Scott Reed with Joseph Lezza. How are you?
Very good. How are you guys?
So happy to have you. Honestly, I'm actually humbled that you reached out, frankly.
Oh,
I
thank
really am.
you. I was humbled that you reached back out. So thank you.
Well, we had published you back, I think it was October, right? With
Yeah,
five,
I think so.
let me make sure I got this right. Five stops on the road to ruin, which is one of the best titles ever. I think you're great at naming things.
Thank you.
Because I went through your website, which is beautiful, and read a lot of other things that you've done. And I actually think you're hilarious. I think you have a gift in terms of being funny. It's very hard to write funny, um, in my opinion. I think it's very hard to write funny. There's very few people that I find entertaining and funny who are supposed to be comedic writers or have some kind of wit in their writing.
Mhm.
And I think I was reading, what is the name? Oh my gosh, I'm the worst. Of
I,
Sound Mind with the George Michael.
yeah.
That was genius. I listened to the George Michael song while I was reading it, like you suggested we might do. How?
That was actually the press that suggested it because originally the original version of that story, because that had been revised many times before it found a home. Um, the publisher basically was like, you know, we can't use the George Michael lyrics, like that's copyright. And I'm like, yeah, I get it. So I had to like go back in and kind of write fake lyrics, but like match the rhythm, match the rhyme a little bit. And I guess like as sort of a disclaimer, the publisher was like, should probably listen to the OG song. And I think that'll help improve the reading experience. And I was like, thank you for doing that. I didn't actually even think about that, but thank you.
It was really great. And honestly, your lyrics were hilarious. What you did with them, it's a great story. And I encourage anybody. And could you plug the story and where it can be found? You could go through your website, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can find it on my website at josephlezza.com, but the story is called Of Sound Mind, and it was published by Unfortunately Literary Magazine, which is just the best title for a story like that. So it belongs in Unfortunately. Just if you read the story, you know it belongs in a magazine called Unfortunately. So
Yeah, it gave me like School of Rock vibes. I don't know if you remember.
yeah, absolutely.
There was just something about it. I loved it. But I also wanted you to be able to just tell us and tell the audience who you are, where you're from. That would be great. I'm talking to you like we're old friends, you know, but the audience might not know you.
I mean, that's the cadence that I seek to effect with everyone. Who am I? I'm a writer on the East Coast. I live in New Jersey, in sort of like the New York metropolitan area. I graduated with my MFA in creative writing from the University of Texas at El Paso back in 2019, and graduated with a thesis that was a very early version of the book of essays that is now going to be published next year in February, which is scary that it's almost 2 months away because that collection was picked up in July of last year. So there was a, you know, significant blip between the actual pickup and publication. And in this time that I just had like, I just got to spend this weird like bubble of time, just like, oh yeah, there's a book coming out at some point. And it was just like felt so far off in the future. And then in May of this year, like I very in earnestly started working on it with the the developmental editors and the copywriters. And since then, it's all felt very real. And all of a sudden, you're having conversations about covers and, sending it out to have people read it. And that's terrifying in and of itself. But yeah, so I hilariously, I guess, when I started my MFA program, I entered fully convinced that I was a fiction writer. I didn't even want to touch poetry. I wasn't sure about nonfiction because I didn't think my life was interesting enough to write about. So I swore up and down that I was a fiction writer. And then my very first semester, I took a class on the lyric essay with a fantastic professor, Liz Scheid, who is the author of the book, The Shape of Blue. And I was just exposed in this class. I didn't even know truly entering this class what a lyric essay was to my, just a statement of my own ignorance. I was thinking in terms of like Beowulf, like epic poems and stuff like that. I'm like, is that what a lyric essay is? And you come to realize that it's just these, beautiful pieces of nonfiction that are told in ways that bend and blend different genres, that borrow poetic elements, that borrow fictive elements. And I was like, this is something I never knew existed, something that I could even write. And by taking that class, I was sort of forced to, as my final, write a lyric essay about myself, about, some chapter of my life. And the writing experience there was so just significantly life altering that I took as many nonfiction courses as I could and wound up graduating, even though I took a blend of, poetry and fiction as well. I wound up choosing creative nonfiction as my discipline, which just goes to show you how much can change in the course of 2.5, 3 years.
So that's interesting. I sometimes ask the question, do you choose the genre or does the genre choose you?
Oh,
so
yeah.
You just kind of answered that question.
Very much be. Very much be, for me at least.
Now, the title is I'm Never Fine, which
Mm-hmm.
made me laugh immediately. And I'm not sure if that was sure because we all say it and we're never fine. Scenes and spasms on loss. How did you come up with that title?
So the I'm never fine part was a happy accident. I'm never fine. I was having a conversation at one point during a pretty tumultuous period of my life. I was having a conversation with my best friend who tends to be very optimistic, and I tend to be a terminal realist. Although I do try, I'm trying so hard to become more of an optimistic person. But yeah, so it's just having one of our many phone conversations, and she, being the person that she was, just kept trying to reassure me, oh, everything's going to be fine. Everything's going to be fine. And I think at one point I just got so tired of hearing it that I was like, I'm never fine. I just screamed it on the phone. And I was just like, it was one of those light bulb moments that I was like, oh my God. Cause I was truly in the midst of working on the thesis at the time. And I was like, well, crap, there's the title right there. And the scenes and spasms on loss part, that was actually very hard because I find it very ironic that you said at the start of this call that you believe I have a talent for naming things, because I went back and forth so much on changing the title or elaborating on the title, because that's actually one of the questions that one of my thesis committee members brought up. In my defense, they asked, do you feel like it's too vague? Do you feel like it needs to be more specific? And I knew that I wanted in some way to hang on to the I'm never fine part because it just felt so organic. But I also knew that I needed to, at least in the title, somehow communicate a little bit more about what the book was about. So, man, I went through thousands of subtitles. I kept trying to find something that, what touched on the fact that it was indeed about loss, but that it also conveyed a sense of humor. And I was like, is it essays? Is it notes? Is it, this and that on loss? And I kind of came to the conclusion that, yes, they are obviously essays, and there is a mix of poetry in there as well. But really, they are sort of scenes. There are vignettes, sort of non-linear vignettes that take place or sort of orbit around this one sort of event in my life. and anything that's not a scene is kind of just a flat out tantrum. So I felt like it was I used spasm instead of tantrum, but it really is like it is very much like um it's it tries to be serious in the serious moments. It tries to be reverent to the things that deserve reverence, but there are also moments of levity, and you know, I sort of the spasm of it all is just a bit of a poking fun at myself for just being the short fuse that I am.
So it's interesting because I David Rakoff, I'm not sure if that's someone you've read ever, but does kind of do that same thing where it will wrap around to you're dealing with a serious subject, but there's a different lens placed on it, which for people like me who tend to have trouble with earnestness, I have trouble with emotion. And I know my co-editors will say, like, I kind of like always play it cool. So if I'm reading something that tends to make me uncomfortable, that little bit of levity lets it land for me a little bit better. So I really appreciate that. I'm very looking forward to reading it. I'm really excited about it. Having read your other stuff, I'm like, oh my God, can't wait
I
for
think
it.
it's necessary. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you know, we always, I don't want to generalize, but I feel like, at least for me, like I feel like I always am trying to find ways, even just normal conversations, when I'm talking about serious things, personal things, whatever, like I think we have a tendency to try to like find the humor in it because it's almost a defense mechanism, because otherwise you're just like, for lack of a better term, you're sort of bringing down the room if you don't find the joke in it all. And I think when you're in the midst of it all, you're trying to find the joke to stay afloat. And then when you're years separated from it, you see the humor that was there that you were too sort of myopic in the time to notice. So yeah, truly any humor that is found in the book is not a product of me thinking, oh man, this is a great place to put a joke in. It's really just it's just a natural byproduct of my re-experiencing those moments, and just, the humorous tidbits that I see now that I didn't see then.
Now, do you have anybody that you've other authors that you've drawn on for your type of writing, for the way you write, your voice in your writing, but not just your voice, but are there any other influences that you've come across that have really helped?
For sure. I mean, I am a massive, massive, massive fan of David Sedaris. I think he's probably one of the greatest living, if not the greatest living humorist right now. I wouldn't ever dare to try to be anything like him, but the way that I just have such a distinct admiration for the way that he takes subjects that in anybody else's hands would probably be mundane, and just he just brings out the pure hilarity in all of it. I mean, like, he has a book, I think the second to last book of his that I read was Holidays on Ice. It's this tiny little book that he wrote, all sort of like surrounding the Christmas season. How appropriate, right? And like the opening essay in that book is all about the time that he spent working as like an elf for Santa and in one of the department stores, which like is like, oh, how funny, like this, what a great backdoor into this like weird little world that we've all been exposed to at some point or another. But I mean, man, he just has a way of like, you know, profiling all of the weird sort of like the weird hodgepodge of men who are playing Santas, and then just the oddball things that like the attendees and the people in the line would say to him, and like, weird things, just like, people who would come up to him and ask him like, what's the line for? And he'd say something like, oh, it's the line to meet Cher, because like what else would the line be for? Um,
Yep.
I love him. So I think like in a weird way, like I try to, I don't want to say emulate, but I guess I very much try to like capture the same spirit that he tries to, because if I ever tried to emulate him, I would fail miserably. But I think there are certainly other writers who just have a super fantastic way of, again, like taking very personal moments, because what is nonfiction if not a collection of personal moments, and finding a way to make it accessible. I mean, Joan Didion was a master at that, and I love so much of what she wrote. Hilariously enough, one of the agents that I queried at one point in the past actually responded to me when I likened the book to something like something Didion might write. In their very pointed rejection, they said, "I think Joan Didion is one of the most overrated writers ever." And I was like, "Wow, okay, so I guess we're not getting along." But yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
Okay.
that's quite a statement. Man, you gotta have some gumption to say something like that. Um, but and I mean, like, of course, there are the writers like the Cheryl Strayeds of the world and the Elizabeth Gilberts who, wrote so poignantly and profoundly on grief. They took extraordinary measures to cope with theirs, leaving their lives behind and, going to, pray in Bali or to hike the Pacific Crest Trail, things that I could not do. But that, were definitely motivating to me in their own way.
Oh my God, that's so you're naming almost all my favorite authors. And I do have a quick, and I won't take up all your time, but a quick
Oh,
David
no,
Sedaris
please.
story. When my son was 6, he loved David Sedaris. He used to fall asleep to While You Are Engulfed in Flames. I'm a great parent. I just would put David Sedaris on the kid. That was what he'd go to sleep to. So one day I came down and there was a little post-it note on the counter, and it said, David S, with the S backwards, is awesome. AWSUM, exclamation point. So I took it and I looked up his publishing company, and I wrote a little letter and said, my 6-year-old son wrote this
Mm.
about you. About 3 weeks later, we get a postcard to my son Kevin. I'm like, this is weird. And it's Thor. It's a Thor postcard from France. And it said, thank you so much for the lovely postcard, Kevin. It was to my son. It was your friend, David S., which I thought was great. So we have it framed on his wall. So
No,
my
like,
son was a 6-year-old.
that's amazing. And like, I wish I had known of David Sedaris when I was a 6-year-old, because my walls probably would have been postered with him. But like, that does not strike me at all as weird, because he last year, I think it was last October, he was in my area and he was making an appearance at a theater to promote his book. I believe it's Carnival Snackery is what he was performing, and he was reading bits from it. And I guess he normally does signings before shows, but he was running a little bit late, so he was like, "Oh, I'm going to be doing a signing afterwards in the lobby if you want to come meet me." And I normally am not an autograph type person. I was back in the day, like, I would stage door all the time, like Broadway shows. But then I think at like 17, I was like, I think this is weird. I should probably stop doing this. So, but for him, I was like, I just have to say like hello and just like thank him for his influence. And I waited truly on a 2-hour line. Like, and it was like the show got out at 10. I was tired. I wanted coffee. There were so many moments in that line where I was just like, maybe I should just go. Like, maybe I should just leave, because it's like taking so long to get up to him. But I'm so glad that I did. And I realized why, because he's a natural conversationalist, and he truly would spend a good 10 minutes with everybody in line, just asking them about themselves. I don't know, giving them recipes. I mean, God knows. And then inside the books, like, not only would he sign it, but he would just doodle something random. Like, inside my copy of Calypso are just 2 trees that he just decided to doodle in there for some reason. I mean, truly, he had like a whole every color of the rainbow Sharpie in front of him, because I guess that's part of what he does, is just draw you little pictures and, sign his name. But I was so glad that I waited, because it was just fantastic to meet him. And I just, again, just thanked him for his work, thanked him for his influence on my own. And he was curious about my book and was asking me questions about it. And, it was just super gratifying to, be able to not only express your gratitude to somebody who's been an influence, but to have them take, even for 5 minutes, a genuine interest in who you are. So yeah,
That's
definitely.
incredible. And to have that experience, to be with one of your heroes and be able to connect on that level, is freaking great. It's so cool. Now he had like just had literary success kind of later in life. What does literary success look like to you?
Oh man.
Like, what would you consider it?
I really don't know if I have a solid definition of it. I feel like literary success to me right now is just defined by the project of the moment. So, for this book that's coming out next year, the whole sort of conceit behind it was, I went through this horrible period of my life. It basically the sort of the traumatic moment that is the catalyst for everything. It was my father's diagnosis several years ago with pancreatic cancer, his battle with it, his ultimate passing. And after he passed, I felt just this inextinguishable anger. And it wasn't anger like for myself. I was just so damn angry at like what a raw deal I felt like he got. And I kept thinking to myself, like, okay, well, this is just a natural part of the grieving process. Eventually it will move on to, depression and, bargaining and eventually acceptance. And like I vested so much in my belief in this like structured like stages of grief that we've all been taught are like is the natural process. And for me, that never happened. I started at anger, I stayed at anger, and the fact that I wasn't moving on only made me double down on my anger because then I began to think, well, not only did I like have to lose my parent, but now I'm not even grieving them properly. Somehow I found a way to grieve incorrectly. So the anger just bore more anger. And it took many years before I finally realized, the stages are, forgive me, bullshit that, may
You're
have.
right.
Well, first of all, like actually, it's such a misconception because I realized after the fact that those like 5 or 7 stages of grief were not designed for people who are sort of on the outside of this sort of traumatic event, but who are on the inside. So that was designed for people who like, received a terminal diagnosis or something like that. You will be in pain, you will be angry, but eventually you will accept it. But somehow that got applied to just like grief in general and everybody has adopted it, and it doesn't work that way. Like if you have lost somebody or gone through some sort of you know painful event, whatever that may be, you may have one stage, you may have 12 stages. They're not going to match what some PhD tells you in a book it's going to look like. And if you try to map your journey against that, you will ultimately fail and you will ultimately feel terrible. And it will take you that much longer to sort of, disabuse yourself of that, divorce yourself from that, and allow yourself finally to go through it. So for me, I wanted to write this book because I felt like, hey, if I'm going through this, there must be a bunch of other people out there who feel just as lost, just as angry. And so literary success truly in the here and now for me is if this can reach one person, and if one person can read this book and come away feeling validated and less alone, and perhaps that might free them to then go on and actually begin to process that. That is a success in my book. Like I don't offer any guidance, I don't offer any steps. All I offer is just an account of everything that I went through so that hopefully maybe somebody can see themselves reflected in that and realize that they're not alone.
Was there a book in your past that connected with you in that way? Like you're trying to connect with someone else?
uh I don't know if there was like a book or a program. I don't know if there truly, I don't know if there was one book. I feel like all of the authors that I mentioned and so many more, like I don't know if it's that I see myself in them or in the narrator or in their journey, but I feel like the books that have resonated with me the most are the books where at least at one point I've been able to say, I know exactly what that feels like. or like this guy just put into words, this girl, this woman, whatever, just put into words something that I have felt for a long time and have not been able to communicate. So I wish I could say that there was like one example, but truly there's just, many writers out there who have, found ways to get at me. Funnily enough, one creator who very much like I saw myself in, I don't know if it's a creator or a character, truly, recently in recent years. And I don't know what this says about me is Fleabag. I don't know. Are you?
Oh, yeah. Okay. You're
I
not the
was
first
like,
person who said that, but yes.
but it's like, and again, it's like, this is one of these things where like I would never, ever, ever pretend to have nearly the amount of talent that Phoebe Waller-Bridge does. But here you have an example of somebody who has lost a parent and who has taken that grief and allowed it to spin themselves off into these crazy places and to do these very sort of like toxic and self-destructive things. And it takes that character a very long time to finally begin to process what happened and to like confront herself. Because again, you have somebody who has her very serious moments, but is also almost always trying to make a joke of things because, at that point when they're making a joke about it, they were not mature enough to actually like deal with it. So what do? We make a joke about it. And so I very much saw myself just like sort of in that character, just in like the things and the places that character allowed that loss and that pain to take her to.
I have to revisit that. I watched it a long time ago and I really loved it, but I have to
It's
revisit. Thank you
brilliant.
for
I will try to get people to watch that until my last breath, man.
yeah.
I will secretly and selfishly pray for a third season while simultaneously knowing it's beautiful the way it is and it probably shouldn't be touched.
I know. I watch shows and I really love them. Like, please don't do one more because it could ruin it for me.
No.
And I'm in this perfect little thing. I know you do other things besides write. You do like some marketing work and stuff along those lines. Do you bring the same creative brain to your marketing work that you use in your writing, or is it completely different for you? Different sides of you?
I definitely feel like I have to in that way because a lot of the work that I do in marketing still very much involves storytelling. Like the marketing that I do involves a great deal of like taking a property and a potential partner, usually a brand of some sort, and finding the commonality and finding ways to celebrate that. So it's a lot of it. A lot of it has to do with pitching custom content pieces where we sort of like film a piece of creative for them that blends the sensibilities of a show or a property with their particular mission at the time. So I mean, yeah, in very much in the way that writing involves research and coming to understand a topic to at least the extent where you feel like you're knowledgeable enough to write about it. I have to employ a lot of the same skills, I feel, just in different ways. The language is definitely different. The style of writing is very different because so much of it is so very top line. Like you're trying to sum things up into like maybe 4 or 5 sentences in a way that feels compelling. Whereas when you're writing an essay, you have all the space in the world, fill it up. So it's a challenge in its own right because brevity not exactly my strong suit. So I have to often challenge myself to like, okay, like sell this idea, like pitch this idea that, is an idea that you cannot, possibly walk away from. And you have under a paragraph to do it. So for sure. I mean, yeah, the long answer to your very short question was yes. Like I do very
I
much.
love your long answers. Okay, I want you to put this in perspective. Who wants to hear an interview where the person doesn't give an answer? That's could you imagine if I asked you a question? You went, yeah, that's yeah,
Yeah.
that would be not good. You're wonderful. So in that regard, does writing energize you or drain you? So when you sit down to write, do you come out with, once you put it on the page, do you feel great, like want to go out or have all this energy, or do you feel like, all right, I just purged it, I'm just going to go lay down?
It's very much dependent on the piece, honestly. I would say there are certainly some pieces that you wrestle with and that are ultimately frustrating because you find yourself at a sticking point, or you find yourself with an ending that you ultimately are dissatisfied with, and at the moment you can't figure out a better way to end it. For example, that story you mentioned earlier on in the call, of Sound Mind, had a very different ending originally than the one that is actually in the published version, and I was always dissatisfied with that ending. And when it was picked up by the publisher, it was picked up conditionally, because they had the guts to point out, hey, not loving this ending, I think we need to work it out. And it was that push that finally like unlocked something in my brain and helped me find the way to end it, the way that it was always meant to end. So there are certainly moments where it is frustrating and it is draining. But there are also these sort of exhilarating moments where, one of the pieces in the book that's a poem, was born out of my editor sort of pushing me and saying, like, there's a gap here, we need to put something here, because there is a space between two essays where the tone shifts pretty drastically, and we need to sort of like prepare the reader for it. There needs to be something to facilitate that shift. So I'm thinking to myself, like, what the crap can I put there? And I'm driving home one night and like an idea pops into my head, and all of a sudden I'm like furiously writing this thing in my head without pen or paper, and I'm like freaking out, but like, exhilarated at the same time, because I'm like, oh my God, I've got to get home right now and get this on paper. And I did, and I scribbled it out and spent the next few days editing it. And out of that came a piece, probably one of the poems, if not the poem, that I am the proudest of, because it just worked out so well. And it was just the product of this sort of fit. Like, there's no better way to describe it. But I don't necessarily know if draining is necessarily a bad thing. I mean, nobody wants to be drained all the time, but I feel like there's a misconception that, I'll tell you what, I don't like the phrase "do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life," because I truly think that's BS, because that suggests that people who love what they do, like, are just Snow White about it, like going around all day singing to birds and just happy as can be, and just like, and never experience a day of work in your life. No, I think that that's a fallacy. I think that you can absolutely love what you do, but if you love it, then you know you're going to have that innate drive to be better at it and to improve. And any sort of improvement involves work, and work can be draining. So, yeah, absolutely. There are moments where you're struggling with a piece and it is absolutely draining, but eventually, whether that's tomorrow or 3 years from now, you could come back to that piece, find the fix that you didn't see all that time ago, and there's the exhilaration that like you were waiting for. So yeah, I mean, both is the answer to your question. Draining at times, yes. Exhilarating at times, yes.
Oh, I'm in love with that answer. I can't even tell you. That is great. I am someone who physically works for a living. That's my job. I'm always doing physical, and I'm absolutely wiped out by the end of the day. At my age, it's getting harder to work out 4 hours a day. It really is. I'm exhausted. I absolutely am drained at the end of every day,
Right.
but I'm very, very fulfilled
For
by that.
sure.
And writing is the same way for me. When I write, sometimes I'm on cloud nine if I write a song, but sometimes I'm very sad because I had to dig deep into a past that I kind of didn't want to revisit, but it
Mm.
came up in the writing. So absolutely. I love that answer. Thank you so
I mean,
much for
that's
that.
why there is such a phrase as sweet exhaustion, right? I mean, there are days where, I mean, for instance, like when I vacation, let's say, like I tend to go places that will offer me at least some sort of element of exposure to nature. I love to go hiking. Like I'd love to just get to walk around, explore, get some miles in, and I can, clear 16, 17 miles in a day without even realizing it. And I'll get back to my hotel and I will be truly, I will have discovered parts of my body that I didn't know could hurt that would be hurting. But
Yeah.
and I'm not at all unhappy. Like I reflect on the day and I think like, man, look, I mean, the things that I saw and, the vistas that I beheld, whatever, like that's a great kind of exhaustion. There's,
Hmm.
there are some not so great kinds of exhaustion, but like there are some great kinds as well.
When is the first time in your life where you realized or discovered that language had power?
I mean, I don't quite know if I have like a definitive answer for that. The best way I can answer that question is I learned from a very young age that there were people in the world whose job it was to build these worlds with their writing, with their language. And I learned that through the programming that I watched as a kid and, the stories that I would read. And I would find myself in certain situations, not all, but in certain situations with a desire to somehow live in that world and to somehow like build myself into it somehow, like extend it, sort of create my own scenarios built off of the scenarios that I saw on TV or that I read in a book. And I think it was then, like, I truly think that I realized from a super young age, like, if there was a story for which, after the credits rolled or, I reached the last page, I didn't want to leave. I recognized, even if I couldn't, recognize it distinctly at the time, I knew on some level that there was power in that because somebody had to think that up. And as time went by and I, began to, I spent some time in high school studying theater and literature and, on into college and into grad school, every day my eyes were opened more about what could be accomplished with words alone. And it's just very striking. I mean, not to sort of like bring up a topic that's already been discussed, but like to sort of bring it back to David Sedaris. I mean, David Sedaris is truly the person who taught me that just words on a page could be hilarious. Like before him, I thought it required like some element of acting or some element of like vocal narration. But I mean, truly, until I read Naked and found myself like in tears laughing, I didn't know that was possible. So every day I'm learning more about that.
Well, your book, is it still scheduled for February?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So I'm Never Fine comes out February 2023. Joseph, Lezza, thank you so much for coming on with us. This has been absolutely awesome. I appreciate you. And thank you so much. Anything else you want to plug? Anything else you're working on before we go?
My blinders are just the book right now. So you did a fantastic job mentioning it. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, you can absolutely, if you go to josephleza.com, there's a link on the main page that will take you to all of the places and the spaces where you can pre-order it. It is available pretty much everywhere books are sold. However, I do definitely recommend if people are interested, pre-ordering or purchasing on bookshop.com as they tend to support local independent booksellers. So definitely go there if you're looking for a place to pre-order, but it's pretty much available for the same price wherever.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining. And hey, happy holidays.
Happy holidays to you as well. Awesome. Thank you for having me.